on the cannibals. When King Pyrrhus crossed into Italy, after noting the excellent formation of the army which the Romans had sent ahead towards him, he said, "I do not know what kind of barbarians these are, but there is nothing barbarous about the ordering of the army which I can see." The Greeks said the same about the army which Flaminius brought over to their country, as did Philip when he saw from a hilltop in his kingdom the order and the plan of the Roman encampment under Publius Sulpicius Galba. We should be similarly wary of accepting common opinions. We should judge them by the ways of reason, not by popular vote. I have long had a man with me who stayed some 10 or 12 years in that other world which was discovered in our century when Veligagnon made his landfall and named it La France Antarctique. This discovery of a boundless territory seemed to me worthy of reflection. I am by no means sure that some other land may not be discovered in the future, since so many persons greater than we are were wrong about this one. I fear that our eyes are bigger than our bellies, our curiosity more than we can stomach. We grasp at everything, but clasp nothing but wind. Plato brings in Solon to relate that he had learned from the priests of the town of Essais in Egypt how, long ago, before the flood, there was a vast island called Atlantis right at the mouth of the Straits of Gibraltar, occupying an area greater than Asia and Africa combined. The kings of that country, who not only possessed that island but had spread on to the mainland across the breadth of Africa as far as Egypt and the length of Europe as far as Tuscany, planned to stride over into Asia and subdue all Europe as far all the peoples bordering on the Mediterranean as far as the Black Sea. To this end, they had traversed Spain, Gaul, and Italy, and had reached as far as Greece when the Athenians withstood them. But soon afterwards, those Athenians, as well as the people of Atlantis and their island, were engulfed in that flood. It is most likely that that vast inundation should have produced strange changes to the inhabitable areas of the world. It is maintained that it was then that the sea cut off Sicily from Italy. Those places, they say, were once wrenched apart by a violent convulsion, whereas they had formerly been one single land, as well as Cyprus from Syria, and the island of Negropontus from the Bosporan mainland, while elsewhere lands once separated were joined together by filling in the trenches between them with mud and sand. Barren swamps, which you could not row a boat through, now fill neighboring cities and bear the heavy plough. Yet there is little likelihood of that island's being the New World, which we have recently discovered, for it was virtually touching Spain. It would be unbelievable for a flood to force it back more than 1,200 leagues to where it is now. Besides, our modern seamen have already all but discovered that it is not an island at all, but a mainland, contiguous on one side with the East Indies and on others with lands lying beneath both the poles, or that it is separated from them. It is by straits so narrow that it does not deserve the name of island on that account. It seems that large bodies such as these are subject, as are our own, to changes, some natural, some feverish. When I consider how my local river, the Jordan, has, during my own lifetime, been encroaching on the right-hand bank going downstream and has taken over so much land that it has robbed many buildings of their foundation, I realize that it has been suffering from some unusual upset. For if it had always gone on like this, or were to do so in the future, the whole face of the world would be distorted. But their moods change. Sometimes they incline one way, then another, and sometimes they restrain themselves. I am not discussing those sudden floodings whose cause we know. By the coastline in Medoc, my brother, the Sieur de Assac, can see lands of his lying buried under sand spewed up by the sea. The tops of some of the buildings are still visible. His rents and arable fields have been changed into very sparse grazing. The locals say that the sea has been thrusting so hard against them for some time now that they have lost 4 leagues of land. These sands are the sea's pioneer corps, and we can see those huge shifting sand dunes marching a half-league ahead in the vanguard capturing territory. The other testimony from antiquity which some would make relevant to this discovery is in Aristotle. If that little book about unheard wonders is really his, he tells how some Carthaginians struck out against the Atlantic beyond the Straits of Gibraltar, sailed for a long time, and finally discovered a large fertile island entirely clothed in woodlands and watered by great deep rivers, but very far from any mainland. They and others after them, attracted by the richness and fertility of the soil, immigrated with wives and children and started living there. The Carthaginian lords, seeing that their country was being gradually depopulated, expressly forbade any more to go there on pain of death and drove out those new settlers, fearing, it is said, that they would in time increase so greatly that they would supplant them and bring down their state. But that account in Aristotle cannot apply to these new lands either. That man of mine was a simple, rough fellow, qualities which make for a good witness. Those clever chaps notice more things more carefully, but are always adding glosses. They cannot help changing their story a little in order to make their views triumph and be more persuasive. They never show you anything purely as it is. They bend in and disguise it to fit in with their own views. To make their judgment more credible and to win you over, they emphasize their own side, amplify it, and extend it. So you need either a very trustworthy man or else a man so simple that he has nothing in him on which to build such false discoveries or make them plausible, and he must be wedded to no cause. Such was my man. Moreover, on various occasions, he showed me several seamen and merchants whom he knew on that voyage. So I am content with what he told me, without inquiring what the cosmographers have to say about it. What we need is topographers who would make detailed accounts of the places which they had actually been to. But because they have the advantage of visiting Palestine, they want to enjoy the right of telling us tales about all the rest of the world. I wish everyone would write only about what he all knows, not in this matter only, but in all others. A man may well have detailed knowledge or experience of the nature of one particular river or stream, yet about all the others he knows only what everyone else does. But in order to trot out his little scrap of knowledge, he will write a book on the whole of physics. From this vice, many great inconveniences arise. Now, to get back to the subject, I find that there is nothing savage or barbarous about those peoples, but that every man calls barbarous anything he is not accustomed to. It is indeed the case that we have no other criterion of truth or right reason than the example and form of the opinions and customs of our own country. There we always find the perfect religion, the perfect polity, the most developed and perfect way of doing anything. Those savages are only wild in the sense that we call fruits wild when they are produced by nature in her ordinary course, whereas it is fruit which we have artificially perverted and misled from the common order which we ought to call savage. It is in the first kind that we find their true, vigorous living, most natural and most useful properties and virtues, which we have bastardized in the other kind by merely adapting them to our corrupt tastes. Moreover, there is a delicious savor which even our taste finds excellent in a variety of fruits produced in those countries without cultivation. They rival our own. It is not sensible that artifice should be reverenced more than nature, our great and powerful mother. We have so overlooked the richness and beauty of her products by our own ingenuity that we have smothered her entirely. Yet wherever her pure light does shine, she wondrously shines our vain and frivolous enterprises. Ivy grows best when left untended. The strawberry tree flourishes more beautifully in lonely grottos, and birds sing the sweeter for their artlessness. All our strivings cannot even manage to reproduce the nest of the smallest little bird, with its beauty and appropriateness to its purpose. We cannot even reproduce the web of the wretched spider. Plato says that all things are produced by nature, fortune, or art, the greatest and fairest by the first two, the lesser and least perfect by the last. Those peoples, then, seem to me to be barbarous only in that they have been hardly fashioned by the mind of man, still remaining close neighbors to the original state of nature. They are still governed by the laws of nature and are only very slightly bastardized by ours, but their purity is such that I am sometimes seized with irritation at their not having been discovered earlier. In times when there were men who could have appreciated them better than we do, it irritates me that neither Lycurgus nor Plato had any knowledge of them, for it seems to me that what experience has taught us about those peoples surpasses not only all the descriptions with which poetry has beautifully painted the age of gold, in all its ingenuous fictions about man's blessed early state, but also the very conceptions and yearnings of philosophy. They could not even imagine a state of nature so simple and so pure as the one we have learned about from experience. They could not even believe that societies of men could be maintained with so little artifice, so little in the way of human soldier. I would tell Plato that those people have no trade of any kind, no acquaintance with writing, no knowledge of numbers, no terms for governor or political superior, no practice of subordination or of riches or poverty, no contracts, no inheritances, no divided estates, no occupation but leisure, no concern for kinship, except such as is common to them all, no clothing, no agriculture, no metals, no use of wine or corn. Among them you hear no words for treachery, lying, cheating, avarice, envy, backbiting, or forgiveness. How remote from such perfection would Plato find that republic which he thought up, men fresh from the gods. These are the ways which nature first ordained. In addition, they inhabit a land with a most delightful countryside and a temperate climate, so that, from what I have been told by my sources, it is rare to find anyone ill there. I have been assured that they never saw a single man bent with age, toothless, blear-eyed, or tottering. They dwell along the seashore, shut in to landwards by great lofty mountains, on a stretch of land some hundred leagues in width. They have fish and flesh in abundance, which bear no resemblance to ours. These they eat simply cooked. They were so horror-struck by the first man who brought a horse there and rode it that they killed him with their arrows before they could recognize him, even though he had had dealings with them on several previous voyages. Their dwellings are immensely long, big enough to hold 200 or 300 souls. They are covered with the bark of tall trees, which are fixed into the earth, leaning against each other in support at the top, like some of our barns where the cladding reaches down to the ground and acts as a side. They have a kind of wood so hard that they use it to cut with, making the swords from it as well as grills to cook their meat. Their beds are woven from cotton and slung from the roof like hammocks on our ships. Each has his own, since wives sleep apart from their husbands. They get up at sunrise and have their meal for the day. As soon as they do so, they have no other meal but that one. They drink nothing with it, like those Eastern peoples who, according to Sudas, only drink apart from meals. They drink together several times a day and plenty of it. This drink is made from a certain root and has the color of our claret. They always drink it lukewarm. It only keeps for 2 or 3 days. It tastes a bit sharp, is in no ways heady, and is good for the stomach. For those who are not used to it, it is laxative, but for those who are, it is a very pleasant drink. Instead of bread, they use a certain white product resembling coriander cakes. I have tried some. It tastes sweet and somewhat insipid. They spend the whole day dancing. The younger men go off hunting with bow and arrows. Meanwhile, some of the women folk are occupied in warming up their drink. That is their main task. In the morning, before the meal, one of the elders walks from one end of the building to the other, addressing the whole barnful of them by repeating one single phrase over and over again until he has made the rounds, their building being a good 100 yards long. He preaches two things only: bravery before their enemies and love for their wives. They never fail to stress this second duty, repeating that it is their wives who season the drink and keep it warm. In my own house, as in many other places, you can see the style of their beds and rope work, as well as their wooden swords and the wooden bracelets with which they arm their wrists in battle, and the big open-ended canes to the sound of which they maintain the rhythm of the dances. They shave off all their hair, cutting it more cleanly than we do, yet with razors made of only wood or stone. They believe in the immortality of the soul. Souls which deserve well of the gods dwell in the sky where the sun rises. Souls which are accursed dwell where it sits. They have some priests and prophets or other, but they rarely appear among the people, since they live in the mountains. When they do appear, they hold a great festival and a solemn meeting of several villages. Each of the barns which I have described, constituting a village situated about one French league distance from the next. The prophet then addresses them in public, exhorting them to be virtuous and dutiful, but their entire system of ethics contains only the same two articles: resoluteness in battle and love for the wives. He foretells he foretells what is to happen and the results they must expect from what they undertake. He either incites them to war or deflects them from it, but only on condition that if he fails to divine correctly, and if things turn out other than he foretold, then, if they can catch him, he is condemned as a false prophet and hacked to pieces. So the prophet who gets it wrong once is seen no more. Prophecy is a gift of God. That is why abusing it should be treated as a punishable deceit. Among the Scythians, whenever the soothsayers got it wrong, they were shackled hand and foot and laid in ox carts full of bracken, where they were burned. Those who treat subjects under the guidance of human limitations can be excused if they have done their best, but those who come and cheat us with assurances of powers beyond the natural order and then fail to do what they promise, should they not be punished for it and for the foolhardiness of their deceit? These peoples have their wars against others further inland beyond the mountains. They go forth naked with no other arms but their bows and their wooden swords sharpened to a point like the blades of our pig stickers. Their steadfastness in battle is astonishing. It always ends in killing and bloodshed. They do not even know the meaning of fear or flight. Each man brings back the head of the enemy he has slain and sets it as a trophy over the door of his dwelling. For a long period, they treat captives well and provide them with all the comforts which they can devise. Afterwards, the master of each captive summons a great assembly of his acquaintances. He ties a rope to one of the arms of his prisoner and holds him by it, standing a few feet away for fear of being caught in the blows, and allows his dearest friend to hold the prisoner the same way by the other arm. Then, before the whole assembly, they both hack at him with their swords and kill him. This done, they roast him and make a common meal of him, sending chunks of flesh to absent friends. This is not as some think done for food, as the Scythians used to do in antiquity, but to symbolize ultimate revenge. As a proof of this, when they noted that the Portuguese who were allied to their enemies practiced a different kind of execution on them when taken prisoner, which was to bury them up to the waist, to shoot showers of arrows at their exposed parts, and then to hang them. They thought that these men from the other world, who had scattered a knowledge of many of vice throughout their neighborhood, and who were greater masters than they were of every kind of revenge, which must be more severe than their own. So they began to abandon their ancient method and adopted that one. It does not sadden me that we should note the horrible barbarity in a practice such as theirs. What does sadden me is that, while judging correctly of their wrongdoings, we should be so blind to our own. I think there is more barbarity in eating a man alive than in eating him dead. More barbarity in lacerating by rack and torture a body still fully able to feel things, in roasting him little by little and having him bruised and bitten by pigs and dogs, than in roasting him and eating him after his death. Chrysippus and Zeno, the leaders of the Stoic school, certainly thought that there was nothing wrong in using our carcasses for whatever purpose we needed, even for food, as our own forebears did when beleaguered by Caesar in the town of Alesia. They decided to relieve the hunger of the besieged with the flesh of old men, women, and others who were no use in battle. By the eating of such food, it is notorious that the Grecians prolong their lives, and our medical men do not flinch from using corpses in many ways, both internally and externally, to cure us. Yet no opinion has ever been so unruly as to justify treachery, disloyalty, tyranny, and cruelty, which are everyday vices in us. So we can indeed call those barbarians by the rules of reason, but not in comparison with ourselves, who surpass them in every kind of barbarism. Their welfare is entirely noble and magnanimous. It has as much justification and beauty as that human malady allows. Among them it has no other foundation than a zealous concern for courage. They are not striving to conquer new lands, since without toil or travail they still enjoy that bounteous nature who furnishes them abundantly with all they need, so they have no concern to push back their frontiers. They are still in that blessed state of desiring nothing beyond what is ordained by the natural necessities. For them, anything further is merely superfluous. The generic term which they use for men of the same age is brother. A younger men they call sons. As for the old men, they are the fathers of everyone else. They bequeath all their goods indivisibly to all these heirs in common, there being no other entitlement than that which nature purely and simply endows all her creatures, by bringing them into this world. If the neighboring peoples come over the mountains to attack them and happen to defeat them, the victor's booty consists in fame and any privilege of mastery and virtue and valor. They have no other interest in the goods of the vanquished, and so return home to their own land, which lacks no necessity, nor do they lack the great accomplishment of knowing how to enjoy their mode of being and happiness to be content with it. These people do the same in their turn. They require no other ransom from their prisoners of war than that they should admit and acknowledge their defeat. Yet there is not one prisoner in 100 years who does not prefer to die rather than to derogate from the greatness of an invisible mind by look or by word. You cannot find one who does not prefer to be killed and eaten than merely to ask to be spared. In order to make the prisoners love life more, they treat them generously in every way, but occupy their thoughts with the menaces of the death awaiting all of them, of the tortures they will have to undergo, and of the preparations being made for it, of limbs to be lopped off, and of the feast they will provide. All that has only one purpose, to wrench some weak or unworthy word from their lips, or to make them wish to escape, so as to enjoy the privilege of having frightened them and forced their constancy. Indeed, if you take it the right way, true victory consists in that alone. There is no victory unless you subjugate the minds of the enemy and make them admit defeat. In former times, those warlike fighters, the Hungarians, never pressed their advantage beyond making their enemy throw himself at their mercy. Once having wrenched this admission from him, they let go without injury or ransom, except at most for an undertaking never again to bear arms against them. Quite enough of the advantages we do gain over our enemies are mainly borrowed ones, not truly our own. To have stronger arms and legs is the property of a sporter, not of valor. Agility is a dead and physical quality, for it is chance which causes your opponent to stumble and which makes the sun dazzle him. To be good at fencing is a matter of skill and knowledge which may light on a coward or a worthless individual. A man's worth and reputation lie in the mind and in the will. His true honor is found there. Bravery does not consist in firm arms and legs, but in firm minds and souls. It is not a matter of what our horse or our weapons are worth, but of what we are. The man who is struck down, but whose mind remains steadfast, if his legs give way, then on his knees doth he fight. The man who relaxes none of his mental assurance when threatened with imminent death, and who faces his enemy with inflexible scorn as he gives up the ghost, is beaten by fortune, not by us. He is slain but not vanquished. Sometimes it is the bravest who may prove most unlucky. So there are triumph defeats rivaling victories. Salamis, Plataea, Micah, and Sicily are the fairest sister victories which the sun has ever seen. Yet they would never dare to compare their combined glory with the glorious defeat of King Leonidas and his men at the defile of Thermopylae. Who has ever run into battle with a greater desire and ambition for victory than did Captain Essais when he was defeated? Has any man ever assured his safety more cleverly or carefully than he assured his destruction? His task was to defend against Arcadians a certain pass in Peloponnese. He realized that he could not achieve this because of the nature of the site and of the odds against him, concluding that every man who faced the enemy must of necessity die in the battlefield. On the other hand, He judged it unworthy of his own courage, of his greatness of soul, and of the name of Sparta to fail in his duty. So he chose the middle path between these two extremes and acted thus. He saved the youngest and fittest soldiers of his unit to serve for the defense of their country and sent them back there. He then determined to defend that pass with men whose loss would matter less and who would, by the death, make the enemy purchase their breakthrough as dearly as possible. And so it turned out. After butchering the Arcadians who beset them on every side, they were all put to the sword. Was ever a trophy raised to a victor which was not better due to those who were vanquished? True victory lies in your role in the conflict, not in coming through safely. It consists in the honor of battling bravely, not battling through. To return to my tale, those prisoners, far from yielding despite all that was done to them during the 2 or 3 months of their captivity, maintained on the contrary a joyful countenance. They urged their captors to hurry up and put them to the test. They defied them, insulted them, and reproached them for cowardice and for all the battles they have lost against their country. I have a song made by one such prisoner which contains the following: Let them all dare to come and gather to feast on him, for with him they will feast on their own fathers and ancestors who have served as food and substance for his body. These sinews, he said, this flesh and these veins, poor fools that you are you very own? You do not realize that they still contain the very substance of the limbs of your forebears. Savor them well, for you will find that they taste of your very own flesh. There is nothing barbarous in the contriving of that topic. Those who tell how they died and who describe the act of execution show the prisoners spitting at their killers and pulling faces at them. Indeed, until the latest breath, they never stop braving them and defying them with word and look. It is no lie to say that these men are indeed savages by our standards, for either they must be or we must be. There is an amazing gulf between their souls and ours. The husbands have several wives. The higher their reputation for valor, the more of them they have. One beautiful characteristic of their marriages is worth noting. Just as our wives are zealous in thwarting our love and tenderness for other women, theirs are equally zealous in obtaining them for them, being more concerned for their husband's reputation than for anything else. They take and trouble to have as many fellow wives as possible, since it is a testimony to their husband's valor. Our wives will scream that that is a marvel, but it is not. It is a virtue proper to matrimony, but at an earlier stage. In the Bible, Leah, Rachel, Sarah, and the wives of Jacob all made their fair handmaidens available to their husbands. Livia, to her own detriment, connived at the loss of Augustus and Stratonus, the consort of King Deiotarus. Not only provided her husband with a very beautiful chambermaid who served her, but carefully brought up their children and lent a hand in enabling them to succeed to her husband's rank. Lest anyone should think that they do all this out of a simple slavish subjection to convention or because of the impact of the authority of the ancient customs without any reasoning or judgment on their part, having minds so dulled that they could never decide to do anything else, I should cite a few examples of what they are capable of. Apart from that war song, which I have just given account of, I have another of the songs, a love song which begins like this. O Ada, stay, stay, O Ada. From their colors, let my sister take the pattern for a girdle. She will make for me to offer to my love. So may your beauty and your speckled hues be forever honored above all other snakes. This opening couplet serves as the song's refrain. Now I know enough about poetry to make the following judgment. Not only is there nothing barbarous in this conceit, but it is thoroughly anacreontic. Their language, incidentally, is a pleasant one with an agreeable sound, and has terminations rather like Greek. 3 such natives, unaware of what price in peace and happiness they would have to pay to buy a knowledge of our corruptions, and unaware that such commerce will lead to their downfall, which I suspect to be already far advanced. Pitifully allowing themselves to be cheated by the desire for novelty, and leaving the gentleness of the regions to come and see ours, were at ruin at the same time as King Charles. The king had a long interview with them. They were shown our manners, our ceremonial, and the layout of a fair city. Then someone asked them what they thought of all this, and wanted to know what they had been most amazed by. They made 3 points. I am very annoyed with myself for forgetting the third, but I still remember 2 of them. In the first place, they said that they found it very odd that all those full-grown bearded men, strong and bearing arms in the king's entourage, should consent to obey a boy rather than choosing one of themselves as a commander. Secondly, since they have an idiom in their language which calls all men halves of one another, that they have had noticed that there were among us men fully bloated with all sorts of comforts, while their halves were begging at their doors, emaciated with poverty and hunger. They found it odd that those destitute halves should put up with such injustice, and did not take the others by the throat or set fire to their houses. I had a very long talk with one of them. When I asked the man what advantage he got um, from his high rank, he told me that it was to lead his troops into battle. Asked how many men followed him. He pointed to an open space to signify as many as it would hold, about 4,000 or 5,000 men. Questioned whether his authority lapsed when the war was over. He replied that he retained the privilege of having paths cut for him through the thickets in their forests, so that he could easily walk through them when he visited villages under his sway. Not at all bad that, but they wear no breeches.